Thank you, Allie. I'm Deb. This is Shirley. We often have a joke that Deb and Shirley has become one name. And thank you, Dean Rutherford and the rest of the Clinton School for allowing us to bring our book to Little Rock. It's such an honor to be speaking at the Clinton School and to be sitting here in the Great Hall at the Clinton Library. This is a place that Shirley and I have visited many, many times, and we love it. When we were doing some work with the Clinton Foundation, I think 4 or 5 years ago, we had the opportunity to come to Little Rock and sit with Senator Pryor, who then was the first dean of the Clinton School, and he shared with us his vision for what the Clinton School could be. And now, 4 or 5 years later, to meet Allie and some of her colleagues and to see what an amazing place it's become, it's really an honor for us to be here. Now about the book. I'm sure it comes as a surprise to no one in this room that the twin crises of Wall Street and Main Street have put most of the nation's nonprofits in a terrible bind. Demand for their services is skyrocketing as their sources of funding grow more scarce every week. We all acknowledge this is a very scary time, but Shirley and I hope that we can help organizations outrun this economic avalanche by sharing the lessons we've learned researching our book. As Allie said, Shirley and I have worked for more than 15 years with nonprofits, first as grant makers with the AmeriCorps program, and then as consultants in our small practice working with large and small nonprofits, doing strategic and policy advice. In this book, we set out to answer a question that has really troubled us over the course of the years, and that is, why do some nonprofits that seem so worthy, why do they continue to struggle, while other nonprofits thrive, seemingly able to attract donors and dollars and top quality staff and highly energetic board members so easily? They have the influence that comes from well-placed champions and the resources that come from committed partners. These guys may worry, but they're going to survive this economic crisis. We call them the charismatic organizations. And we're going to spend the next 25 minutes sort of sharing the lessons that we've learned, but then what we'd really like to do is take questions from you guys, because I think we have a lot of questions.
So let me start with a question. How many of you are working at a nonprofit organization? Okay. Volunteering on a board? Okay, so we got pretty much everybody. That's why you're here. So here's the thing. Our answer is really simple. What is it that these highly successful, high-growth organizations have that the ones that are struggling don't have? They have something that we call social capital. And if you are a student of all forms of capital, you know that social capital is the power and the value that is represented in the relationships that you and your organization have to people. Because at the end of the day, who makes a decision to give you money? People. Who decides to call you up and create a cause-related marketing partnership? A person. And who decides to come volunteer at your, to answer your phones or to maybe make a little less money by working for you instead of a company? It's a person. It's all about people. So the secret to this is a simple one. Social capital leads to every other form of capital that you could ever dream of having, right? It's the financial capital, it's human capital, it's political capital, everything that a nonprofit needs. Publicity, who decides to come and cover an event or not, or write about you or not? It's a person, a reporter, or an editor. So it's all about people. So what you need to be doing to crack the nut of success isn't thinking about how do I get more money, because the money ain't going to get up and walk in the door itself on its little paper legs. It's going to come because somebody decided to give it to you. So the idea is we try to figure out what is it that people want that will make them want to come and be part of your organization. So we read, we're kind of like, you can see we went to a lot of schools, so we did a lot of research, and we figured we'll figure this out by reading all the studies. And so we read studies of what makes a donor give money. And we read studies about new donors, these new high-tech donors everybody wants. We read about volunteers, and we read about workforce trends, and why does somebody choose to work at a nonprofit instead of a for-profit. And it comes down to two really simple things. One of them is people want to make a difference. It's as simple as that. They want to make a difference. And the second thing is they want to be part of a community. They want to come to an event like this and see people they know. They want to come to work and feel connected to the people who are there. They want to volunteer and maybe meet some other volunteers and form some networks. They want to be connected to a community. And even if it's not a physical connection or a personal connection, even if it's an organization that exists largely in cyberspace, they feel like if I give to this organization, I'm part of that world. And we certainly saw that in the last election for people who made donations to candidates who had never had any dream of meeting the candidates, but they felt connected. So how do you build those two things? People want to make a difference. People want to be part of a community. So that's the 8 ways. So we're going to go through them really quickly now to give you a taste of it. And I'm going to start with one that seems pretty obvious. And any book that you read about good management is going to start with this, whether it's a for-profit book, like Built to Last or Good to Great, or a nonprofit book, and that is mission. People want to make a difference, so they need to know what is that compelling purpose that should draw me to the organization. And I know, having been involved with a lot of nonprofits, and we consult with a lot of nonprofits, that organizations tend to spend a lot of time on those mission statements, right? And you have you do the retreat and the board meeting, and the words get tweaked. And sometimes what comes out the other end is absolutely incomprehensible, right? And so what's really important is not what that official mission statement is, but can everybody who's connected to you say what it is that you do, that the purpose that you exist for? And it doesn't matter if they can have memorized sometimes the how-to books will say, well, the mission statement should be between 50 and 75 words. Well, it doesn't matter. It's got to be something someone can remember. And it's got to be compelling. So that's where you start. And it's interesting, some of the best mission statements come out of companies because they need to inspire their employees in the way that nonprofits want to inspire everyone surrounding them. So then the second thing is, if you're going to make a difference and we know what purpose we have, we need to know how are we going to achieve that purpose. And that really has to do with being data-driven and having those mechanics right that will help show that path of how you're going to bring about that amazing result that you want to have happen. So that's why organizations spend a lot of time figuring out their logic models and theories of change, which are, boiled down to, if we do this, then that will happen. And we're going to need these resources to bring that about. And that's often a very, you can get these very wonky people who will sit there and work it all out for you. But in a very simple sense, it's an if-then construction. If we do this, then that will happen. And what's really important, and we noticed that all the organizations in the book that did well actually count stuff. They have measurable outcomes that they're trying to achieve. It's not, I'll know it when I see it. It's not like good poetry. It's actually like they will count what happens as a result of what they do. And they will count, did this many more people show up to our offices to get the service because we offered it on Tuesdays instead of Sunday nights? They will count everything. And then they know what works better than something else. And it's a tedious and sometimes distracting thing to do to count everything. But if you don't do it, then how do you know what one thing is better than another thing? And that leads me to way number 3, which is innovation. So a lot of the organizations that we feature in the book, some like City Year, which is here in Little Rock as well as other places, is one, but there's about a dozen others. And most of them are what we would call social entrepreneurs, and they were created in the last probably 20 years. But the other group of organizations that really do this well are those that come from the progressive era, the turn of not this century, but the last century, before World War I. And those organizations are like brand names. that you probably all know, things like the Girl Scouts and Goodwill and the Junior League and NAACP and the National Rifle Association. You could just go on and on and on. And they all happen to be created during a sort of 30-year period around the turn of the last century. And what's amazing about that, and as we read a lot of books that detailed how these organizations got off the ground. And it was amazing because this was back in the day when there wasn't like big government programs to fund them. And it was back before the big foundations really got big and were really doing a lot. So these organizations, pretty much none of them started because a big foundation gave them a $2 million startup grant. They got started because somebody had an idea, and they figured out how to make it work by doing it, and then they shared what they knew and recruited others to do it too. And so other branches would start, And so if you look at almost any of those organizations, that's the pattern they followed. And you know what that means? They were all founded on social capital. Now, if you think about these organizations back in 1910, and they're still alive today, they obviously couldn't freeze in time and be the same kind of organization. They might preserve some things that were important, but they had to evolve. And that's why innovation is a key. And we think it's probably one of the most important ways and the least noticed ways that organizations become really successful. They constantly are trying to make improvements, stay up with the context of the times, do something better than some other organization that is maybe in the same space. And being data-driven and it's very important because that's how you tell. If I did it this way and more kids came, I did it that way and we didn't get such a good turnout, look at reasons why. Maybe it's because it was against American Idol or something. But it's trying to figure out what's better. And if you look at a group like the Girl Scouts, it's one of my favorite examples because if you look at the old Girl Scouts, they had those big bloomer uniforms and they were teaching housewifery. And it was a real success in the early 1900s. Well, there's Girl Scouts today, and they have one of their spokespeople is two young women who are Run DMC's daughters who are on MTV in a reality show, and they have their own sneaker decorating business, and they don't do badges. They're de-emphasizing badges because they're not cool, and they're adding things like going green and teaching young women about technology, and they're very cutting edge. And that's how the Girl Scouts today continue, even at a time when these groups often are struggling. I think they're going to come out okay because they get it, that they have to keep doing these things. In contrast, I'll just share a story of an organization from where we're from in Bethesda, Chevy Chase, outside of Washington, D.C., which is a nice suburb. And we have an American Legion. We had an American Legion post in Bethesda, and in the 50s it was a big heyday, and there were 500 members, and they had a clubhouse and a pool table and TVs, and it was the place to go, and the organization was doing great. And it closed a couple years ago, and the reason it closed, I remember this very poignant article in the newspaper we actually quote in the book because it really struck me, that there are these guys who are World War II veterans, and they're saying, we were having the hardest time getting people here. A lot of our members are moving to Florida, or they're becoming ill or passing on, and we haven't been able to recruit any new members, and we can't figure out why. And the one gentleman went on to say, it's like we would pretty much give them the space. They could do whatever they wanted to. And, look at it. It's this great space, and, you can see a picture of the pool table and the TV sets, and it's like, and you can smoke here. You can't smoke anyplace else in downtown Bethesda. And yet they couldn't get anybody through the door. Well, they didn't evolve. They didn't, every year their membership was declining. That was a number they could have counted, and they didn't heed the warning. So by the time they were down to 30 people who might show up at any given time on a weekend, that's not enough to sustain the organization, and they had to close. So innovation turns out to be a really important way.
Thanks. As Shirley said, people want to be part of a community that values them. And they also want to feel good about being part of that community. So two key components of creating a solid core are what we call can-do culture and people-focused management. Now, every organization has a culture. Some are just more appealing than others. Culture is a little hard to define, but there are clues of it everywhere. From the stories people tell, to the way the org chart looks, to the red jacket the guy's wearing from City Year. I mean, there are clues to culture everywhere. And as Shirley said, we did a lot of reading, and there was one really important quote that we have in the book, that the most important thing a manager can do, a leader can do of an organization, is manage its culture. And the second most important thing it can do is kill it when it becomes dysfunctional. I thought that was really interesting. Culture provides the team spirit that keeps everybody together when things are tough. It reinforces the important values of the organization, its character, and its style. Much as charismatic leaders attract disciples by painting a picture of a really great future, an optimistic organization can really be a magnet. We talk about an Eeyore culture. That's not what you want. You don't want the doom and gloom, especially in today's times. Keeping a can-do culture, an optimistic attitude is critical. No one wants to be throwing good money after bad. So one of the things we're really encouraging our clients and people who come to our readings to do is to keep a positive culture and try to really talk to your staff, your board, your donors about the fact that you are going to survive this time and you're going to survive well. You're going to need their help, but you're going to do it. You don't want to be the Eeyore in the group. Charisma is also about attracting people. It may seem obvious, but being people-focused has the obvious relationship to building social capital. Getting the right people in the right job is a key to your organization's effectiveness. As Shirley said, it's people who deliver the program and get the results. It's people who manage your volunteers and recruit your donors. So how do you find the right people? In our book, we talk a lot about the very first thing you do, which is creating a job description. Now, sometimes people put everything but the kitchen sink in a job description. They want the best person possible for that job. But what happens is you end up discouraging anybody but Superman from taking that job. And so we really encourage you to be really specific. Like, as we say in the book, does your receptionist need to be a college graduate? Does your chief operating officer need to have an MBA? Be really careful about how you go after the people that you want to hire. My sense, though, today is that you're facing a different problem. And the problem might be that too many people want to come work for you. You may be overwhelmed with fabulous resumes from people who have left law firms, investment banks, Fortune 500 companies. These are the people who all of a sudden have decided they want to leave the corporate world and get a job in the nonprofit sector. And my fear is that they don't have no idea what they're getting into. So the other thing that we really encourage people to do is what we call be relentless about cultural fit. Now, your organization may culturally be, you may be a group of social activists. You may be a group of scientists. You may be a social innovator. Your culture will determine whether or not that new person is going to fit or not. We tell a story in the book about Dorothy Stoneman, who is the founder of Youth Build USA, which is a national network of youth programs that combine job training with national service. And diversity is very important to Youth Build. And she was asking a job applicant if he had any experience working in a racially and ethnically diverse environment. And this person who had a fabulous resume stopped and said, that he had a friend who lived in an apartment. And so that's the big joke, that she knew that he perhaps would not fit into Youth Build. After finding the right people, you have to keep the right people. And we talk about building an environment of trust, teamwork, strong internal communications, and a sense of respect for everybody connected to the organization. Not just your top staff and donors and board members, but your junior staff, your administrative staff, your clients and your volunteers. This is particularly important in times like this, when hard decisions are being made and favorite programs and services are probably being cut. People will be more supportive of these decisions if they understand why they're being made and they don't feel like they've been left out in the dark when the decision is being made. Perhaps nothing says more about your organization than the way you treat people that you have to let go. Again, using Dorothy as an example, Youth Build makes it a policy to help those people it fires or has to let go with as much dignity as possible, even providing them with unemployment insurance for as long as they can. Dorothy took such care in firing one employee that she had to do it 3 times, she says. He's still one of her biggest fans and continues to stay to donate to the organization. Now, the five ways that we've just talked about are ways that build a strong core of your organization. That's what we call bonding social capital. No matter how strong your core is, though, doesn't mean anybody's going to help you or join your organization unless you reach out and engage those people. New donors, new staff, new volunteers, new allies, these are the people who are going to bring fresh financial, human, and political resources to your organization. That's what you need to grow. Compelling communications is an essential part of the process of winning new friends and allies. Charismatic organizations are, by definition, fabulous communicators. In particular, they know the power of a good story, and they get their story right with an ideal mix of emotional and logical appeal. I'm going to share a story with you. This is a story from a friend of ours named Jill Violet, who is the founder of Sports for Kids. We actually never read from our books, but I'm going to read this because we didn't write this part. It's the story of Jill's. When asked why she started Sports for Kids, Jill tells the Clarence story. 10 years ago, I was waiting in the office of an elementary school when the door opened, and 3 boys shuffled out. At the time, I was the executive director of the Museum of Children's Art in Oakland, California, and I was there to talk with the principal about filling the need for art education in her school. The principal didn't want to talk about art at that moment. She turned to me in total frustration and asked, "Can't you do something for these boys? Every day they get sent to me from the playground for fighting and causing trouble." The moment she asked the question, I remembered Clarence. As a kid growing up in Washington, D.C., I spent every afternoon playing at the park. Most days I was the only girl on the playground trying my best to get into whatever the boys were playing. Clarence, a Parks and Rec employee, made sure, in a very cool way, that I got in. Of course, once in the game, I had to hold my own, but Clarence made sure that I got the chance to play. I adored Clarence and never forgot what a critical role he played in my life. I could do something about this problem. I could make it so that every kid had a Clarence. Now, the Clarence story teaches you something. It teaches you several things, actually. One is that Sports for Kids is a program that principals want and was created in response to a real need. It also reminds you as grown-ups that all children don't automatically get in the game. According to Jill, after hearing the Clarence story, most listeners have an aha moment and remember the Clarence in their lives. Now that she has your attention, Jill then describes the problem that Sports for Kids solves, which is that in many communities, kids come to school not knowing how to play. They don't know how to make up and follow the rules to a game or how to resolve conflicts. Too often, games end in fights, and schools have felt they have no choice but to end recess. She also tells you how Sports for Kids works. It provides an energetic, young, well-trained site coordinator, a Clarence, to elementary schools with a majority of low-income students. The site coordinator creates a safe, structured, and inclusive environment on the playground during lunch and recess. Teaches kids games like kickball, wall ball, foursquare, and when a dispute arises on the playground, that time-honored dispute resolution tool, rock, paper, scissors, has replaced fights and name-calling. Within the first 10 minutes of sitting with you, Jill will also slip in a couple more stories, complete with survey numbers and statistics that tell you how much the lunch ladies and school nurses love the program. The teachers talk about the positive feeling in their classroom after kids have had a chance to play, and the parents are so thankful that some adult in the school knows their child's name. She'll also make sure that you know that every school, all of which are in low-income communities, loves their program so much that they will pay $25,000 each every year to have a Clarence in their school. Now, Sports for Kids has used this amazing storytelling ability to grow their program from 2 schools in Berkeley, California. They just this week celebrated their 10th anniversary. They have 115 schools nationwide, and they just got an $18 million grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to go national. That's a huge success story, and And we tell you this because they're a model of people who've used the story to communicate. Now, finding a good story is not easy. Who has the time? Organizations that find the right story are very intentional about it. In fact, Sports for Kids has created a special dedicated phone line for everybody connected to the organization, including the lunch ladies and the school nurses and the parents, to call to share their stories. In addition to the stories, they have great, charismatic organizations have great tight elevator speeches. And some of our trainings talk about these elevator speeches that it's very fun because when we do trainings, we ask people to write down their elevator speeches. And if you have the same people from the same organization there, it's really fun because no one has the same elevator speech. And that's been a really exciting part of our training. Lastly, Shirley and I really encourage our clients to use their office space, to let their office space tell their story. Sometimes we say we feel like the reality judges in Office Makeover, a new reality TV show, where if you think about it, when someone walks into your office, what do they see? When that new donor, that new employee, that potential foundation exec walks in, are you using the spaces to tell your story, or have they found your conference room so full of old files that there's no place to sit? I don't want to take up too much time.
Okay. So part of the deal here is, these stories really have to relate back to the mission and who you are, and it turns out it's really important for everybody who's connected to the organization to be able to talk about it. And that's the last piece I'll talk about is how do you involve others. Because if you don't have that involvement loop, you can have the best thing since sliced bread, but nobody's going to come on in. So how do you invite them in? Well, I used to work with an organization that it was a battered women's shelter, and they had a lot of needs for human social capital. They needed clients to know about them so they would come when they were in need. They needed money. They needed volunteers because they had a hotline that needed to be staffed by volunteers. And of course, they needed a variety of other things, political help and staff, et cetera. And they'd siloed themselves so much that they had a person whose job it was to raise money, a person whose job it was to recruit volunteers, and a person whose job it was to do community outreach. So, the community outreach person would go out and give talks, never ask anybody if they wanted to volunteer. The volunteer coordinator would go out and recruit volunteers and never ask for money, et cetera. And it became very frustrating because this organization just couldn't get off the ground. So they went to the board, which was a largely young professional women, who many of whom actually did volunteer with the organization, and who were tremendously committed to the mission, and could even talk about the mission. But they said to us, okay, now we need you to go raise some money. We really need you to raise money. We want you to ask your friends to come and give us money. And we all just sat there like, oh no, we don't want to do that. Because I was thinking, what's it like to be on the other side? I know I feel really uncomfortable when, we have a lot of door-to-door canvassers in our neighborhood. And, when they come to the door, I'm thinking, how do I make them go away, giving them the least amount of money possible? Because I don't feel connected to them. I'm not, and so you have all your defenses up. So it would have been a lot better if they had said, okay, board members, we just want you to get people to learn more about our organization. Let's have a fun house party, get your friends to come. We're not going to ask them for money, we promise. We're going to just tell them about what we do, see if they want to volunteer, see if they know anybody who needs our services. Now that would have been a lot more comfortable. So we thought, how do you do this on a sort of Uber scale? And we realized a lot of the organizations we studied actually have lots of doors in. City Year has a wonderful visitors program. And if you go, you learn so much about the organization really quickly because they have decorated very well, as Deb points out. But other organizations have, lots of one-off, easy things to do to invite people to get to know them. So great, you get people through the door, they get to know you, and then the next thing isn't ask for money. The next thing is ask them to become involved in other ways. And so organizations that end up building strong social capital have lots of things that people can do to be connected. And I'm not going to go through all of them because we'll run out of time. But it is everything from having events to having volunteer opportunities to having educational opportunities like this. and even finding fun ways for people to donate. So my last story I'll tell you is a story of since technology is an area that's really sort of in a growing way for organizations to to penetrate and to reach new people. I want to tell you the story of Love Without Boundaries, which is the organization that won the Facebook Causes Challenge. I think it was a year ago, or 2 years ago, excuse me. And how many of you are on Facebook? So a lot of people are getting on Facebook these days, which is cool. But at the time that this challenge came out, not so many people were on Facebook, and not so many people over, like 25 were on Facebook. And the Case Foundation and Facebook decided to have a contest to try to see if this online giving through social networking would really work. And they said that they would give $50,000 to whichever organization, it was completely open, could get the most individuals to donate through Facebook causes during a period of time. Now that means that all these kind of big brand name organizations could have done this. But the one that won was one you've probably never heard of called Love Without Boundaries, which raises money for orphans in China to get medical procedures that they need. And what they did was they picked 10 kids who needed heart surgery. And in China, it turns out to be pretty inexpensive. So you can get heart surgery for $5,000. So if they won the $50,000, these 10 kids would live, which is kind of compelling, mission. The next thing they did was very non-high tech. They enlisted all of their volunteers and people they knew, which started out as a fairly small circle, and decided to try to get them to all give and to do what, there's a wonderful free online book by Seth Godin called Flipping the Funnel, so I encourage you to look that up. But basically what Seth talks about is most fundraising involves like a funnel where you get a lot of people in the top and a few kind of come out the bottom and give you money. And that's the methodology. Well, he says pick up that funnel, turn it on its side and make it a megaphone and then give it to everybody you know. And that makes a lot of established organizations really uncomfortable because they want to control their message. But it turns out that if you just let people talk about what inspires them to do something and give them the megaphone, they will recruit others using whatever methods they have. So Love Without Boundaries, which was started by was headed by a woman who wasn't on Facebook herself and had to create an account with her kids' help, started reaching out to everybody she knew and handing them the microphone and handing them the megaphone and saying, recruit some other people. And they won. And those kids were saved, and we were all happy about that. But it was a great lesson that you don't have to be a big, sophisticated organization with a big direct mail list, although that's a good thing. But it's also something that you can do as a small organization if you enlist everybody you know, even if they're not already connected to the organization. A great involvement opportunity is asking them to reach out to others. But they can't do that unless they know what you're doing, and they know why it's important, and that they know they can make a difference. So I'm going to close with a story that my old boss, Eli Siegel, used to tell when we were creating AmeriCorps. And it took a lot of work. It took a lot of mundane late nights going through regulations and torturous other experiences. And he would tell the story to remind us how important it was that we keep our eye on the prize. Many centuries ago, a wanderer came upon a work site, and he saw a worker who was stirring a vat of mud, and he asked him, "What are you doing?" And the man said, "I'm making bricks. I'm a brick maker." He walked a little further, and he saw another man who was leveling a piece of wood, and he asked him, "What are you doing?" And the man said, "Well, I'm leveling a piece of wood. I'm a carpenter." He walked a bit further, and he came to a man who was clearly chiseling some rock, and he said to him, "What are you doing?" And the man said, "I'm a stone cutter, and I'm building a cathedral." You all have people who want to build cathedrals. Give them the tools and teach them to talk about it, and you will find that even in these tough times, you'll get through and you'll be stronger at the other end. So thank you so much for letting us come and talk with you.
We have time for a few questions. We have 2 mics roaming around. If you would just please raise your hand, we'll get a mic to you. Any questions? Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Nicholas Hall. I'm a student here at the Clinton School. And as an AmeriCorps alum, I would just like to say thank you to you both. And I was wondering your thoughts on the idea that nonprofits should pay their employees more to recruit higher talent to actually promote their mission more so than spending their money on resource-driven goals.
Sorry, say the last part, spending their money on what?
Spending their money directly on resources to promote their mission and goals.
Well, you know, markets are funny things. We often think that nonprofits would be great if they could pay more, and they often, you know, they can't because of the resources that they have. And certainly there are organizations that are paying huge salaries, and nowadays people do look askance at that. But the vast majority of nonprofits are actually very small and have very few employees and don't pay them very much. So, and they don't really have the option to pay a whole lot more. But that doesn't mean they can't get top talent. And the strategy for that is to make sure, you know, that first of all, everybody who's working there really understands and experiences the joy of helping others. It's often easy to have somebody who's got the routine job of keeping the files straight to forget that they need to hear that great story that happened in the field. They need to hear about that too, so they can stay inspired too. There's also ways that organizations can value their employees that don't cost extra. And often, again, we forget to do that. Kaboom, which is an organization that builds playgrounds that I'm quite fond of, has a lot of young staff. You know, they have a lot of turnover. And one way they encourage people to stay at Kaboom is if you're there more than 2 years, you get your caricature painted on the conference room wall. Which seems like a little thing. It doesn't cost much, but it's just one way that people are valued and become literally part of the institution. So those kinds of things matter, and you know, if we aren't thinking every day, how can we make it great for people to come to work here? They'll leave. It isn't always about the money. Sometimes people leave the most unbelievably well-paying jobs because they just really aren't getting anything out of it.
We tell a story in the book about Youth Build and the collective years of the people who worked at Youth Build for really minimal salary because it's amazing the quality of the staff who's been there for many years because of what they get out of their work. So, you know, it is a shame how little some people get, but there are other things than money at this point.
Any more questions? You back there, sir. 1 second. 1 second. Well, wait for the mic. Thank you.
Don't really need a mic. I guess. In recent years, well, in fact, all my life, I guess, volunteer boards tend to replicate themselves by inviting their friends on,
Yes,
which may not be the best thing to do. For instance, my wife is director of the Arkansas River Valley Arts Center, and the artists want all artists on the board when they would be better off with patrons.
Yes. Not to give you a short answer. We talk a lot about the need to have diversity in everything you do because if you have too many people all the same mindset, then you aren't innovative and you're not reaching larger networks. And part of what's happening on a board, Shirley and I both believe that nonprofit boards are the great underutilized resource for nonprofits. And that if your board is diverse, then your board can reach even greater networks. So you can grow your networks and your social capital can grow exponentially. So yes, that's a very smart. Your instincts are right on that one.
And in the area of innovation, if you got everybody from the same field and the same background, it's going to be really hard to innovate. And having sometimes organizations can benefit tremendously by having that out-of-the-box business leader, or maybe a kid from the community who represents the client base. Having both of those perspectives represented on the board can often really spice up the conversations and get out of the same old, and that's what it takes to be a continuously innovating organization.
Right there. 1 second. Are you? We'll start with you, and then we'll get you after her.
Thank you very much. My name is Sarah. I'm a student here at the school. My question is about evaluation. I come from a background that likes numbers, likes tests, likes pulling data together, and I'm working for an organization that part of the culture is outside the box. Everything is outside the box, keep it innovative, keep it fun. But in my own brainstorming, I'm having a really hard time thinking of innovative, fun, unique ways to also gather the data to do the evaluation tool to help our story and mission get out there.
Creative evaluation, I love that. Well, one thing, organizations that I've seen that do really well, they count everything. They aren't just going to evaluate their program impacts. They're going to evaluate, how their own staff turnover. They're going to count they're going to have the practice of autopsy without blame is what one of the guys in our book calls it, that after every event or every project is completed, you just sit down and just say, okay, what worked, what didn't work, and why, and you really are disciplined about that. I'm finding in Washington these days there's this real, push towards results-oriented decision-making, and I'm all for it. We do a lot of stuff for political reasons that isn't so good. So good results. But that doesn't mean there's only one way to capture results. It's not, you don't have to just have a randomized control group study in order to find out if something's working. So I actually think it's often better to, if you collect a lot of data, and you can then on a very, almost on a day-to-day basis be able to tell how something's doing. That's going to be a stronger organization than one that did a randomized control group study with 20 participants 20 years ago and has frozen in place a model that worked for those 20 people, but is impossible to update because you might lose your track record. So it's a trade-off. And I think that what they call anthropological evaluation is sometimes a really great tool, which is just to get people to be interviewed and understand their stories and sort of in real time document how something unfolds. We did that in the early days of AmeriCorps, and it was tremendously instructive.
Can we get a question right back there? 1 second.
Yes, you mentioned the need for a positive culture. Given the economy, many organizations are having struggles financially. Could you speak to, do you not share that information with people, or do you be more forthright?
I'll give you a great real-life story. I chair the board, I think Ali mentioned it, I chair the board of a program at Tufts University that has a very large endowment. And the problem is that endowment is now underwater and can't be accessed. So we went from being a really highly resourced program to we've had to cut our budget more than half in the last 3 or 4 months. Well, our board only meets twice a year. So I insisted, we use, unfortunately, our family and our boards that we serve on as laboratories for our book. So I insisted that we communicate to the edge of excess with our board members and bring them into this conversation. But at the same time, keep a really can-do attitude. So we called a phone call, board call, before our board meeting, which is in April. And we laid out in pretty specific terms the challenges that we were facing. But we wrapped it up in a conversation in which we were all very committed to success and to rethinking the business model and keeping things going. And it was very positive, and it was amazing. I mean, the staff was petrified before the call. But we had 2 of our biggest board members on the call. Both of them said it was the most positive, exciting board call they've been on the last 6 months. They ended up writing checks that they hadn't expected to write. They all appreciated being brought in on the problem and began thinking outside the box on ways we could solve it. So we were really honest. We were really positive. They really appreciate it. No one likes surprises. And they all want to feel like they can maybe contribute to the solutions to the problem. And I think the worst thing that can happen is if you do a cloak of secrecy, that's how people will perceive it, and then they're surprised, and they're angry, and they're scared, and that's what you don't want. So I was so thrilled by how that turned out, but it sort of turned out the way we hoped it would turn out.
Yes, ma'am. One second.
You talked about bringing new staff from former private into nonprofit. I have kind of 2 points. Is there a way to know who of those would be successful as your new staff? Number 2, how do you help them become stronger in the process?
I think that's great. I think it requires a more nuanced interview process, perhaps. not being so blown away by their resumes, but trying to understand if they would fit in. But one of the things we're trying to say is that everybody shouldn't be the same. So diversity is good, but you don't want to bring somebody in who's going to really upset the apple cart. So just being more nuanced. Trust your gut instincts is like what Dorothy did. She just gutturally knew this was not going to work. And I think training.
Well, a lot of times when people go, from one, field to another field, whether it's, from business to nonprofits, or we certainly have seen this with people who get into government who haven't worked in government before. They don't have the lingo, they don't have the vocabulary. And some people can make those translations and some people can't. And you have, I'm a big believer in sort of, an interview process that involves having them talk to everybody from a volunteer to the board chair to see if they're just playing up or playing down. And even if they don't have the right lingo, can they have a conversation? Because if they can't have a conversation with, the more junior people in the office as well as the more senior people, they aren't going to be able to function, in a different way. So that's one really important thing I would do. And then, they will take extra training, but they may bring extra benefits. And most of the organizations that we looked at that were really successful actually did have people who came into their nonprofits from business. So it's a good thing to do, but it's not everybody who's going to be able to make that fit.
Yeah, we don't want to discourage you from looking at people and bringing people in who have these other attributes. Just be cautious and don't be swept away by the resume, I think.
Well, the other thing is, a lot of times they don't get it, that they're not going to get a standard issue secretary, and, that their computer might be, 5 generations old, and it won't they might be the person who has to figure out how to download the software. So,
yeah, they are the person
that's another
who's
thing
downloading the software.
That is something to just be honest about. People would rather know that up front than be wondering when that secretary is going to show up.
We have time for one more quick question. You're right there, sir.
This subject is probably a little closer to home, but I'm curious, speaking of innovation, how important is marketing and what role should marketing play in terms of nonprofit organizations?
Well, marketing is hugely important, but it's a different kind of marketing. It's telling that story that's going to, it might take a little more time to help people understand, but by the end they're going to be, singing. The authentic messenger becomes really important. So when we think about sort of, mass scale marketing, it's not the same. Having somebody that all the studies say, the person who's going to persuade you, the best person to approach somebody, whether it's to get a person to give a donation or to volunteer, is going to be somebody they know. So using that marketing strategy of building a lot of connected people into your organization who can go out and do that person-to-person marketing is going to be more effective than putting an ad in the newspaper. Because they get their information about organizations largely from people they know, whether it's an email or an invitation to join a cause on Facebook or getting invited to a house party. It is a person-to-person situation that is often more effective until you get to the level of like Heifer International or the Clinton Foundation. You got that brand name. It's pretty hard to go on, just cold calling, and so it's really important to think of it in a different way.
I just want to end by saying that Shirley and I wrote this book while we were working. We have a joke that when we used to pitch clients in the early days, and we always would tell people that they would be able to work with the principles of Sagawa Jospin. Well, that's just the two of us. There's nobody other than Deb and Shirley. And we've actually done this book ourselves. I don't know if any of you have written books lately, but when you write a book, especially a book like this, this is not a John Grisham book, and there's not a lot of marketing behind it. And we've had to create our own social networks and use our own charisma and build our own social capital to get the word out. And we just really want to thank Skip for bringing us to Little Rock and introducing us to you guys. And the booksellers are here, and it means a lot to us, and we just really want to say thank you. Thank you very much.